So welcome all to our final session of our Neurodiversity Lunch and Learn series. Dr. Diana Perry-Cruz and Dr. Jason Clements are again going to lead us today. So thank you all for being here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming today.
Hello.
We are excited to be here. This is our last one in our Lunch and Learn series. So if you happen to just be joining us today, that is no problem, but I'm Diana Perry-Cruz, and we have been talking in this whole series about neurodiversity and how we can best serve the students that we have here at Regis. So this is, a four-parter, but I still feel like it's sort of an introduction to the whole topic, but we've recorded them all, so you can go back and check out the previous ones if you missed them. Jason, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jason Clements. I think I know pretty much everybody here. I'm a professor of English and Film Studies and chair of the Humanities Department.
Awesome. Okay. So for today, I kind of see this as a little bit of a two-parter here because I wanted to give us some initial strategies and start to think about how we as administrators and faculty can best take action to serve our students. And then I also wanted to have us do some case studies and some sort of group brainstorming and discussions. I know that that is something that's been important to this group, and individuals have brought up different scenarios and components of this sort of all along the way. So I hope that we can do that together as a group as well. So that's our goals for today. And I pulled from a lot of different places to kind of get some of this info for today. And there's so many great resources out there. So what we've kind of put together here is a little bit of a amalgamation, I guess, of different initial sources. But the way I saw it, there were about these 6 different things that I feel like were good topic areas that we could think about when we're thinking about how we want to create inclusive environments and settings and really set our students up for success in this type of academic environment. And so the ones that we're going to review today, and I could have named these a lot of different things, but these are the names I chose. We're talking about individualization of our educational practices, touching back on accessibility. And I know last week we talked all about UDL, Universal Designs for Learning. So we touched on this topic then too, but I wanted to bring it back up in some additional capacities here as well. Number 3, talking about creating sense of belonging in the classroom or other academic or collegiate, I guess, spaces. Number 4, thinking about our environmental arrangements for varied settings that we might be in with students. Number 5, thinking about our class and group structure. So what are we setting up from the get-go as arrangements that are hopefully going to be successful? And then number 6, thinking about intentional skill building for our students and how that may or may not, fit in with what you're doing within one class, but may fit in with sort of overall orchestration of our interactions with our students. So Jason, you feel free to just jump in anytime you want to. Okay. So for our first point here, I named it individualization. And what I mean by that is, of course, every student that comes to us, right, we're going to think of them as an individual, but it's important to recognize that students from varying different backgrounds and varying neuro profiles may come to us from different places, different past perspectives, and with different current needs as well. So, and that is going to hold true whether they carry a particular diagnosis or not. The diagnosis itself doesn't indicate on its own what a student's specific needs are. That's going to be individualized for that student. So if you have students who are coming to you with accommodations from our Accessibility Services Office, of course, we want to make sure that we are addressing those and accommodating those. but it's also important to recognize too that not all students who need accommodations will come in with that letter, right, ahead of time. So it's important to know if that is already established, that we work with that and individualize or make modifications as needed. But it's also important too to recognize that for reasons we mentioned previously, it can be challenging to get a diagnosis. Students may not always have gone through that process, haven't had the opportunity or the resources to go through that process, or they may not recognize that there are accommodations out there that are available to them.
And it's important that, sorry, and I think it's important on that note to keep in mind that it can be easy for us as instructors to assume that there are these sort of one size fits all type things. Like you might know, for instance, that you have a student who, I don't know, gets an automatic 1 week extension on long writing projects, gets testing accommodations at the center with time and a half. And let's say that they disclose to you that that's because of autism and dyslexia, for instance. And then maybe 2 years later, you have a student who also discloses autism and dyslexia. And in my experience, students are very willing to disclose, especially dyslexia, maybe because I teach English, that's just, they feel like they need to, I don't know. But, you know, say 2 years later, then after having that student, you have another student who has those same diagnoses. That doesn't mean you then want to assume that their accommodations will be the same, or be like, oh, that's weird, they showed up on this exam day, why aren't they at the testing center? Well, I mean, you know, as we know, autism is, maybe less so dyslexia, I'm not as familiar with it, but autism is indeed a spectrum, like a pretty amorphous one, right? So that it might just be that the particular challenges they experience are not really aided with that particular accommodation. So it's just good to keep in mind that it's never one size fits all, and we don't want to assume that it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So in addition to that, there are also ways that you can get to know your students, right, individually in class. And so I have a link here, but it takes me to it's like a downloadable Word document. So it's kind of like hard to easily show this group in this setting. But it was a survey that was done by Cornell, and it's actually part of a IRB project that they had going on that was looking at neurodiversity on campus and how supported students felt. But it was really interesting the way that they approached it. And so they initially were asking students, did they, did they have any particular diagnoses that they felt were impactful for their learning? And then they asked them about their comfort level in a variety of different settings, including, classroom settings, but also various different types of campus activities, and whether they felt that they needed additional supports, accommodations, or modifications in those settings as well. And it was intended to be, it was a combination. So some of it was like, just check off these areas where you have been participating or would like to participate, and then also free-form write-in additional points and ways in which you would like to, feel accommodated. So I thought that that was a nice potential jumping off point, right? That one might be able to use to find out more about what your students see for themselves as their perceived needs in your classroom, their comfort level in a variety of different activities, right? And how well they feel like they're currently being accommodated. So that's something that, if this is important to you, that you could modify or create or something so that you can pass it out and have all of your students, when they're first coming to you and you're first meeting them, do something along this line. Wouldn't have to be that specifically, but it might be kind of helpful. And then something that I often do with my students as well is as I get to know them, I ask them about how they prefer to get some of the information for their class, right? So do they prefer to have videos? Do they prefer to have the PowerPoint as a PDF or as notes ahead of time? Do they prefer to get, I don't know, like written instructions or a video of instructions, those types of things, which I can't always accommodate, but it's good for me to know if there's a tendency in one direction or the other towards that, and I will obviously accommodate anything that I can. And I also ask folks in my field, because I'm working really closely with them over long periods of time while they're working on their master's theses and stuff like that, what is their preference for feedback? And I usually do this in the context of a one-to-one type of meeting with them, because, and I kind of start that out with a story of what my own experience is like for feedback. And I tell them about the fact that for me, I am incredibly sensitive to feedback. So like any little change in like the phrasing of something or the way that someone kind of like looks at me, like I take that like really seriously, and I will overcompensate sometimes with that. So I think I'm sensitive to how people may take in feedback, because I am a person who's sensitive to that. And what I tell them is my general go-to is I'm working the art of subtlety, right? So like I'm putting out like tiny little crumbs, and because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings type of thing. But I say, I know that that's not how a lot of people like to receive feedback. So you tell me, are you someone who like likes to deal in subtlety, or would you like a direct message on what it is that needs to change? And then I will adjust how I interact with them moving forward, so that I can give them the type of feedback that they're most comfortable with and which is most useful for them. And you can also ask them, do you want to have, Zoom feedback or email feedback or in-person feedback? And if you're able to accommodate any of those things as well, then that can be helpful for students with different formats. Okay, so moving from there, like I said, I wanted to just bring back and make sure we touched again on accessibility. And accessibility and UDL are not not identical categories, but there's some overlap between the two. But I wanted to just add this slide in here to make sure that we noted that there are ways in which you want to ensure that your classes and the materials that you are providing to students are accessible to them. And we talked about this a little bit before previously as well. I did put a link up here for this Berkeley Disabled Students Program faculty resources page, because it contains a lot of great information in there, and you could go check that out if you want to see what they have up there available for their instructors. But some general basic points for this area is using clear language and instructions. So making sure any written instructions that you have are clearly worded, and that when we're talking with students, we're also thinking about, are we using a lot of idioms or pop culture references or slang to make our points, because for some students, those the translation of that may kind of get lost along the way. So it's okay to include those things, but also we want to make sure that that's not the only way that we're presenting information. So we're presenting it clearly to our students. Generally thinking about accessibility, we want to think about our font and our color options. So we're not picking like colorblind combos, right? Something that's really clearly can be seen easily. And then fonts such as Arial and Calibri, ones that do not have a lot of the extra fiddly bits on the end. Obviously there's another term for that, but I can't remember. Sans serif, I think that's what we want, is the sans serif fonts. Those are better choices, and that also holds true for individuals with reading disabilities as well, that these would be the font choices that we would like to pick. And we touched on previously adding in those alt text descriptions for graphics, using the +1 UDL design that we discussed in depth last week, which was such a fantastic way to think about that. And providing as many exemplars and different ways of approaching those instructional choices as we can. So providing a template or a rubric or examples, any or all of those are really great. Having those subtitles available. You can do live subtitling now via Zoom or via PowerPoint, and that is not too bad. Like, they do a pretty good job. So having that available, if you were teaching, and even in your classroom, if you put your PowerPoint up, you can turn it on so it will do subtitles, and then they'll be available as you talk, which is kind of cool. And then finally, knowing the resources that may be available for your students. So I had a student ask me, what is a PDF reader? Because I would really like, I want to read this article that you've assigned, but I do a lot better if I hear it out loud versus have it like me trying to read it on the page. So we together found some options for him, for example. So those types of resources can be quite useful for students. So as much as this as you can have on hand and can have thought about before is really critical. And there is a big piece of all of these slides here, I think is just with, is related to the intentionality that we have when going into working with our students. Because in each of these situations, these are choices that we as instructors and administrators can make beforehand to best assist our students. And once the train is going, it is a lot harder to, I don't know, what's my metaphor? Am I switching tracks? Am I building another track in midair? I don't know. It's a lot harder to do that, right? Once you are already on in class. But if you can make these plans ahead of time and anticipate what some of these potential needs may be, then everyone in the class is going to benefit. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to wait until I know for certain that I have a neurodivergent student or a student with a disability, and then I'll add in all of these things, because you really don't know. You don't necessarily know. And I always assume that I have at least some neurodivergent students in the class. And even if you aren't neurodivergent, you benefit from these types of arrangements and modifications, right? We all benefit from this. So it's best practice, really. Okay, I'm going to move on. And the next thing I wanted us to talk about here was creating a sense of belonging for our students. And this, for me, is an important part of doing this series as a whole, because I want this to be a part of our culture here at Regis, right? That we are thinking about this, we're thinking about the diversity of our students in all of the different ways and all of the different lived experiences that they are bringing to us, and creating an environment for them here where they feel included, heard, and seen. So there's different ways of doing that, and it's all about just the creation and then continuance of that culture amongst us and amongst our student body. So one, of course, like small way, it's just a little thing, right? But we could add something to our syllabus that would, you know, speak to neurodivergent students to have them feel that they are included and seen and heard. So I Frankensteined this statement together based on 2 different sources that I found, because I liked some different components here. So this could be something that we, that you adopt, right? If you have syllabi that you write, or you could certainly do something on your own that's a different type of version. There's actually a lot of different examples out there. But the one I chose said all students learn differently, and I'm open to talking about what works best for you. If you would like to, if you would like strategies to approach this class and want to discuss accommodations, come see me. I hope to create an inclusive and productive learning environment for you, as an example. And putting something like this up front and center in your syllabus, it sends that message to students, right? That is your goal, and it's something that you've thought about and are purposefully including, right? And you don't have to get every single thing right. Like, we're all learning, and this is a process for everyone, but it's there, and it's demonstrating your intentionality toward this. Additional things to think about with respect to your syllabus would be, what are the values that you have for your class, and maybe including some of that in that language. So is it important in your class that everyone respects one another? Sorry, I like set you guys up. That was like an easy question. Of course it is. But if you are, again, it's about arranging things ahead of time, right? So if you have language in there that says we're gonna respect one another and we're gonna allow one another to talk, and it's important to me as your instructor that I give everyone a chance to have a voice in the class if they want it, right? Like building in those types of statements can potentially, they're not going to prevent problems from happening, but they're going to create an environment in which if you are starting to see issues with classroom dynamics or, you know, students talking over one another, for example, then you have something there already that you can sort of bring to the forefront and talk about again as something that's important in the class and as part of the class, you know, not like rules, not like, you know, first grade rules, but like part of the class structure. And the syllabus is also, we can think of it as a contract, right, between the instructor and the students too. So pieces in there, if it needs to be, you know, including like, we're going to make sure that we let one another talk or something like that, you can like have it be like really explicitly stated as well. And then with regards to a sense of belonging, I just also wanted to let everyone know that we, in conjunction with Courtney's office, are working on a neurodiversity student initiative in which we have neurodivergent students on campus have opportunities to interact, meet one another, develop that sense of community amongst themselves, right? Because that's really, really critical, is finding someone with whom you feel you can share an experience. Sorry. So that got up and running this year, and we're in the process of getting that to be functioning as a really, hopefully a meaningful support for our students on campus. They meet as a group. The plan is for them to do group activities together and then have supportive neurodivergent leaders of those groups too. So that's another way in which we can build that sense of belonging on campus. And this is obviously one slide. So there are lots and lots of discussions to be had about how to do this and do this well, but I want to present it as the kernel of this idea. I'm not seeing the chat. Is it going okay?
Yes, I'll just fill you in. We were talking about the syllabus.
Okay.
Everybody likes your statement, so I am going to take that from you afterwards as something that we can circulate as an optional inclusion for the syllabus.
Okay. Thanks. All right, and then I wanted to also talk about what I call environmental arrangement, but maybe that's like a term from my field. But I wanted us to think about the spaces that we're in with our students and how we can try to ensure that they are welcoming and accommodating. So this is, you know, part of that same idea of creating a culture of acceptance. So there's a term called masking. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that term, and maybe we talked about it another time too. The term masking indicates that someone feels that they need to kind of like put on a show, basically. So the way that I, you know, quote unquote, normally want to be, or the behavior that I normally engage in, or the way in which I honestly feel most comfortable, if I were to do that with everybody else around, I would be looked at as weird or not fitting in, or be told that I couldn't do some of those things. And so when I'm with other people, I don't do those things, but it's really, really hard. That's the idea of masking. So it can be really emotionally, physically, psychologically draining, and sometimes traumatic for people to kind of keep up with this masking over time. So when I say creating a culture of acceptance here, what I'm meaning is, if possible, allowing people to not have to engage in that level of masking when they're with you or with that group of people. So I attempt to do this in a couple ways. When students first come into my class and I first meet them, I give them some of these types of guidelines. Like, guess what, folks? They're all adults, right? Like, you're in grad school, at least for me. And I want you to be here. I want you to come to class. I want you to come here and learn, but you can learn in the way that you learn, as long as it's not distracting to other folks. So if you need to get up and walk around, totally do that. Go walk around in the back of the room. You can leave at any time. You don't need to ask my permission. If you want to bring in any like little fidgets that you have, or your knitting, your crochet, I'm all for it. That's awesome. If you need to wear noise canceling headphones, or you prefer to keep your coat on or something like that, that's also totally fine. Right. So I sort of like just give them like this type of permission to do those things. And then I also try to think about sort of the sensory components of the classrooms that I'm in. And honestly, a lot of these things are outside of our control. But I ask people about, do they want the door open or closed if it seems like kind of loud outside? Or I'll like do like the doctor's office or the optometrist. I'm like, light option 1, light option 2, which one is better, right? And they're basically the same, but at least I'm giving people option, right? We talk about the temperature. I try my best, but that's definitely out of my control. And then if I've turned off the lights for a movie or something like that, I will say, okay, everybody, I'm about to turn the lights back on before we turn them back on. So little things like that as much as I can to try to help people for whom those types of sensory experiences are really overwhelming. I'm trying. And then I also try to give everybody an outline for what we're going to do in class. So are we going to do group activities? When are we taking a break? When can they kind of look forward to that as well? And we talk about those things ahead of time too. So if anyone has challenges in transitions or planning or knowing what's upcoming, I'm trying my best to provide that information. So that's how you might work to arrange your environment. And then for this section, thinking about our class and our group, class/group structure, right? So whether it's you're in class with students or you are facilitating a group or working with them in another capacity, I think that thinking about how we would want to encourage students to participate in their own way. And we want students to get the most out of their learning opportunities that they can. So to me, this ties in really nicely to the UDL piece as well, because not everyone maybe feels the most comfortable in all of the different settings or all of the different activities that we're asking. So if we can find ways to vary what that looks like, that can be really critical, as well as options within those activities for how students may participate. So I basically just threw up a bunch of ideas onto this slide. But I'll just try to explain them. So you could encourage participation by allowing students to time for students to process the question. So if you've asked something orally and someone's hand shoots up right away, that student very quickly auditorily processed your question, thought of an answer, and wants to share. That's awesome. But you may have another student who's still processing the question and also wants to answer. So not just calling on that first guy, right, who's always got his hand up, but maybe waiting a minute and calling on someone whose hand is up later on. So that they've had more time. Another option could be that you ask a question, maybe you put the question on a slide as well. It's another way you can make this accommodation. But you pick a name. You can pick a name out of a hat, right? That might work for some students. That might be horribly anxiety producing for other students. So sometimes the solution that you are trying to find to accommodate one person then is difficult for someone else. And that's the case. Maybe you add in a piece where you say, if I pull your name, you also can phone a friend and you can talk to the person next to you and you guys can come up with an answer together or something like that. You can include what's called active responding cards. So giving students little note cards at the beginning of the class. I've done it before where they're like red, yellow, green. So like yes, no, maybe cards. And then you've sprinkled throughout your time with them opportunities for them to vote on yes, no, maybe for whatever the question is of the day. Or you can give them note cards A, B, C, D, and then have little quiz, quiz opportunities in your class for them to multiple choice answer questions. The advantage of this is everyone's participating. This is actually a great way to have everyone participate. And there's no vocal component required, right? You just have to hold your hand up too. So for students for whom that is difficult, this could be another way that they can access active learning in the classroom and not have to speak out. In the same vein, you can have anonymous responding on Kahoot quizzes, or you can have people put in like pretend names if they're doing the quizzes together to potentially get around some of those same challenges. And then, as I just alluded to, I love a think, pair, share. The nice thing here is if someone doesn't want to speak to the whole class or is nervous or they need a little more time to process, they're first talking to their partner. And then between the two of them, they're deciding what is something that they want to share with the class. So all of these could be potential ways that students might be able to participate in it, as long as you as the instructor are flexible in the approach. So those are some ideas. And then in a continuance of this one here too, I think that an important piece of all of this is that we are not solely saying, well, those neurodivergent students need to be the ones who adapt to my classroom, right? This is the way I've done it. This is the way I've always done it. And we just need to make it happen. Because if you have students for whom just coming is potentially a challenge, right? And they're attempting to process what you're saying and taking notes, and maybe the environment's too loud, and maybe they're feeling anxious, and there's a whole, a list of things going on there. And then now we're also asking them to, sit still and quiet in their seat, and then have small talk with their partner. All of these pieces is a lot, on top of just learning the material, which is the whole point of being there, right? So asking our students with potential disabilities to do all of that work is leaving out a large portion of the classroom and the population that could also be making this a better learning environment for everyone. So those would be neurotypical students. So, when I say educate neurotypical students, I don't mean, oh, we're gonna talk to our class about how someone in this class has a disability. Obviously, we would not do that, right? We cannot disclose, and we should not do that. But if we're working to create an environment of inclusion, then it may be as simple as highlighting in the beginning, right? Those statements about how everyone has different learning approaches and how we want to be understanding and helpful in that setting. And if you do that every class, I'm sorry, I don't mean like every time the students come to class, but I mean, if you do that, if you're always doing that whenever the students have you as a professor, that's part of your initial introduction to the class, then that does work toward creating that type of culture. So that was point number one here. And then point number two on this slide is thinking about how, when you are, again, I know I'm talking about teaching, but when you are creating your assignments for class, thinking about what is it that you really want your students to take away, and anticipating what potential hurdles might be. So some of those hurdles are things that maybe are really important in order for them to learn the material and reach the goals of the class. And if so, then we can work to find ways to have that happen for students with whatever support it is that's needed. But it also may be the case that we have something in mind that for us is like, this is a great assignment. This is really what I want. But the hurdles around it are less about what the students ultimately need to learn and more just about the way in which we're trying to have the assignment happen. And so if it's that type of hurdle, then we can think about adjustments that we could make to the project itself. And some of those UDL strategies that we talked about last week would be ideal. And if it's the first piece where like, yeah, I've thought about it and this is material that the students need to learn, you know, for example, then what we want to do is then from there, think about ways that we can really help promote the success for the students. So we could do these types of scaffolding where we're scaffolding our assignments or scaffolding our reading. So presenting what the assignment is or what the reading is, but then breaking it down further from there and maybe dividing that assignment up into different component parts before the whole is due at the end. As an example, I have in one class, I have a big assignment that the students have to do, but it's not due till the end, right? And they're writing kind of a long paper, but it's based on 2 questions. So there's 5 questions to pick from. So they only have to pick 2 of the questions. So that's like a UDL strategy there too. And then on 2 different weeks, one of the homework, 1 week, the homework is tell me the 2 questions, right? So they do that and I say, okay, great. And then another week it's write me a 1 to 2 paragraph answer for that question. And then I give them feedback on if they're on the right track. And then another week, couple of weeks later, they write the same thing for the next question. And then I say, great, now put all that together. And this is the beginnings of your final paper. You just need to expand upon it in these ways, right? So that's an example of how you might do that type of scaffolding. You can also help to arrange peer mentors, and that may be something that is available as well through the accessibility services. And you can allow students to do note sharing or for students to take notes for another student, right? Depending on what that student's needs might be. These are ways that you can, again, sort of, we're trying to get to an end, right? Like if our ultimate goal is having these objectives met for our class, then there are ways to assist students toward getting there. And then, like we kind of talked about before last week, what other options might be for students if we're asking them to do presentations. How can we modify that or make it available in flexible ways so that that student can participate in what's going to be the goal, even if the method looks different. All right, and then finally, this is my last of my 6 categories here, and then we have some case studies that we can talk about too, is thinking about student skills that students need to build. And this isn't specific to ND or NT students, right? Everybody needs to work on all of these things that are listed here. But seeing them here and thinking, again, with intention about how we might assist students towards some of these goals can benefit them in the long term. So I tried to kind of break it down into what we might see as student self-advocacy skills and student success skills, but there's obviously overlap. But for self-advocacy, we want students to identify what their own needs are. And I know that that's come up a few times. We've said students, may not even know what accommodations or strategies may be beneficial for them. So helping them identify those. Students knowing how to request accommodations if those are needed. And then self-regulatory strategies. So how do you kind of like get yourself back to baseline if you're upset about something? And we all have those strategies, but we might not, necessarily have thought about them in that way before. And then, identifying that and helping students also recognize, like, what are the things I can do when I'm feeling overwhelmed and upset? And then self-care, which falls into a similar category, but some of those may be more longer term strategies versus short term strategies. And then underneath the success area, these all go hand in hand with the idea of us as instructors try to be as accommodating and flexible and anticipatory of potential needs as possible. But there are still things that students need to do in order to be successful in learning whatever new material it is. So those might include strategies on organization, time management, how to ask for an extension. What if they want to join a group or a study group or you know, the little groups that form before class, like how do they kind of get in there to meet some new friends? What are their studying skills like? How are they emailing the professor? What are their procrastination behavior, and how might they identify that and work against it? Not to keep talking about me, but in one of my classes, I actually have this assignment. I have an assignment where we say, these are the steps to email your professor. Your homework today is you email me and imagine that you need to ask me for an extension, right? And I've been getting some beautiful emails. But if you haven't ever learned it before, right, you might not know. So I'm laying it out there in really clear terms that this is what the expectation is, and now let's practice it together. So those are the things I wanted to kind of present to us as potential strategies. And I know there's a lot more to say, but I want to give other people a chance to talk. So we have Jason and I made some case studies for folks, and I figured we could probably stay in the big group unless people have a strong preference for small groups.
I think the preference last time was pretty unanimously for whole group. So I'd say let's do that unless we get some strong counter suggestion, I guess.
We are getting none as far as I can tell. So that's great. Yeah. Okay, great.
Oh, and
large group in the chat
for a few people, but also Erica was saying we should maybe, before we go into the case studies, just see if there are any general questions.
Sure, of course.
Hearing none. I think we're good.
I'm sorry, I have one.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So one thing I was thinking about, which is a very sort of, oh, sorry, there's sirens going by here, but kind of an old-fashioned skill that we learned or dealt with when we were getting our PhDs, right, is how to listen to a lecture, or how to listen to or participate in a class that really is a teacher coming in. I mean, you can tell who teaches this way because I'm suggesting it, right? A teacher who comes in and says, we're going to talk about this chapter in this novel, and here's some of the questions I've been thinking about and wondering what questions you know, so I come in and I chat, right? Which can be hard for, and especially, you know, thinking about, you know, the ways that you've described, sort of getting students to sort of anticipate what's coming up next. And is there a way, you know, do you have some tips for, because I think it's an important skill, and I don't think I want to totally change my style, although I definitely do for certain for certain lessons. Sometimes it's all group project work, or all, right, there's all kinds of ways that I present my material or think about how I want students to interact with the literature, but a lot of times it's let's go in and chat, right? And are there ways, I mean, I can think of some just based on what you gave us, but if you had some ideas about how to teach students how to listen to and take notes on that kind of chatting that sort of seems free form to them, though of course I'm following my notes, right? You know, do you recommend that I give them my notes beforehand, or, I mean, I don't know, you know, because I do think it's a skill that they need to learn, because there aren't going to be, you know, in other settings, they're going to have to listen to a long thing and then make something out of it when they leave school, right? So there aren't going to always be sort of markers for certain moments, and this is the point you listen to, and you should write this down. Though I do, you know, I do sometimes I see them staring at me and I say, let me backtrack. Let me say this again. Would you like to take that down as a note? You know? So, I mean, I think that we can, especially for undergraduates, it's important that we teach them how to take notes and what to listen for, and whether a lecture is turning now to a new topic, like how can you tell that we're transitioning to something else now? But if you had anything like that, maybe not to discuss right this minute, but, or if anybody here that might be an interesting, resource that we could maybe even make to.
Oh, I think you muted.
I just touched the thing. How to teach students to listen to lecture.
Yeah, that's a great.
Rather than always, I mean, I do think it should be switched up a lot. I can see my students need that a lot, and I do that. I'm pretty flexible, but every once in a while you have to go in and speak for 15 minutes about something.
Yeah. And as a professor, 15 minutes feels like nothing,
us.
I'm like just getting rolling at 15.
Right? I could talk for 45 minutes about Toni Morrison, but is that a good thing to do? No.
Right, but what we know too is that 10 to 15 is about people's max, and then they zone out. So that's true. I think I see your point. Like, you don't want to give away the whole lecture that you want to then have with them by presenting it ahead of time, but it may depend on what your goal is for the lecture. So if the goal is that everyone's kind of like arriving at the point together, then maybe you intersperse lecture with opportunities for them to like do a thought question with a partner that then kind of still gets you to the same end. And then if it's just like, let me tell you about Beloved, the plot, then maybe you provide some like points of reference ahead of time in written format. But
yeah, I see Jackie's suggestion. I do that, Jackie. I call them lecture quizzes, where I hand out the questions and we and I say it's a quiz you can't fail because I'm not really grading it. And we, and I hand that out and they fill it out as they go. And some students have said that's been helpful because it teaches them what to listen for, but sometimes it's pretty funny because then they raise their hand and say, oh, wait, you asked this question on the quiz. I don't have the answer for it yet, and it becomes, then we're all filling out the quiz together, which is kind of funny, but
right.
Yeah. But I think any resources like that, in other words, I want to adapt and be flexible to them and their learning style, but I also think we need to teach them how to listen and take in our styles too, to learn how to be flexible, because they're going to be facing a lot of different ways of having to learn information. So I think it's our responsibility to be ourselves as faculty and teach them how to take that in. So
yeah. And like Jason, in your courses, like folks have to watch a movie and pull themes, I assume, from the movie, right?
Yeah, themes from in a literary sense, but also often related to like the specific techniques of filmmaking, like that are not analogous to traditional literature, but then nonetheless it becomes a sort of literary analysis.
Great question. I don't know.
I have a
yeah,
a question that you may have addressed at the beginning. I had to come in a little later. How, and particularly this semester, I dealt with several students that were not registered with the office, but evidently showed that there is something going on. They never talked about it, or they never emailed me. Somehow in a couple of cases, they sort of expected that I accommodate them, but they were not even registered in the office. How do you address that? Who do you talk to without violating any FERPA confidentiality issues? I wanted to get some advice on how to start that process.
I always feel like our fourth case study scenario is kind of about that, but maybe not entirely. But as far as the question of a student who seems to be asking for accommodations but doesn't have anything officially registered with Courtney Mulligan, is that what you're? Yeah.
That's one scenario. The other one is that in reading their assignments or even trying to listen to them in class, there is evidently something going on with that student, but the student has not approached, is not registered and has not approached me or their advisor or anybody. So how do I proceed in such case? The student is evidently not able to meet the requirements and so on as your general student.
My instinct there would be a general concern flag on Starfish, because I know that gets to people who are sort of better suited to address it kind of, outside the classroom. But I suspect that there might be better, more thorough responses to be had from other people here.
I actually did that. And in one case, I was basically confronted by the student, and I mean, it turned out that everything worked out, but because when we flag them, then they pay attention to you. But I found in several cases that the student immediately confronted me with, why did you do this or that? And I don't want to say to the student how do I speak to the student if it is a case where evidently the student has learning issues? Where do
you go? Yeah.
Where do I go? Yeah.
So I think it does bring us right to this case scenario. So I put it up here too.
Great.
But
thank you.
So anyone can contribute here with their thoughts. I think that you may first see if there are ways in which you can, approach some of it with flexibility within the class, such that anyone might benefit from those types of modifications without needing specific accommodations. But I know that there are also situations where it's beyond that, right? And it does seem as though they need additional accommodations beyond maybe what you can just provide by, making your approach flexible. And so then I would go to my director first, and then from there see what resources might additionally be available. But others may, again, have better solutions and answers to that than me. So I'm happy to hear. And then as maybe everyone's kind of had a chance to read some of this too, but it does seem like a close parallel here where a student may be expecting to have accommodations.
And, I wrote this scenario, and it's based on it's not fictional at all. It's completely based on a situation with one student who I've had in at least one class every semester since 2021. And this is what every assignment, this is what happens almost without exception. It won't be turned in on time. There will be discussion of an extension that will get kicked down the road, sometimes for over a month. And when we do time, this student would want to talk to me after class about it, not come to office hours, but try to, get a word in after class. But it was so difficult to speak with them because they were just, as soon as we started actually discussing anything beyond, yeah, sure, you can have another week, that's fine, right? If I wasn't saying that, and if instead I was saying like, well, look, you really want to focus on getting this done because the next paper is coming up right at this point. And also the student's work was always good. Once they submitted it, it was very strong work every time. There was some sort of confidence issue or issue with just making that first step of getting started, which I'm super familiar with. Procrastination, even on things I feel like I'm going to knock out of the park. Ultimately, hard time getting started, self-doubt, misgivings, all that. But yeah, this was just over and over again. And it became clear, though, in the conversations that the student thought that their accommodation somehow entitled them to indefinite deadlines on anything they pleased, which was not the case. But that, I realized after a while, was what was informing our very frustrating 5-minute chats after class. Plus other additional factors, such as the student could not make eye contact with me, had a hard time getting sentences out. I mean, there were clearly like a sort of constellation of factors there. But it's hard to know how to deal with it, because you can tell the student is struggling despite them clearly having the intellectual ability. But you've got to kind of, as I said in the second square, you want to support this student, but you also want to maintain equity, because it's not fair to students who might have similar challenges, but also understand that ultimately the negotiated deadline is the deadline, and don't keep trying to, kick it out another week or two. So it's a tough thing, needle to thread.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What does everyone
Fortunately,
think?
Courtney is, I mean, I'll get Courtney looped in at the drop of a hat if I feel like it's going to be productive, unproductive otherwise. Is Courtney here? I can't actually see the whole group. But I'm always pretty unreluctant to get Courtney brought into it, because A, that this is her purview, and B, I think she's extremely effective at communicating with the students that she oversees. So I will always make a point of looping Courtney in basically as soon as it seems even remotely appropriate.
I'm sorry, it's Donna. Just thinking ahead to some students I'm going to have this summer, that all at the doctoral level, but who I know are already behind and where they're supposed to be, and at this stage and the courses that they're taking. And I guess, is it fruitful to have a conversation about, like, what are the barriers? Like, is it a learning issue, or is it you're overcommitted, or is it that you're like, just to really try to tease out where the problem is or the problems are, so that we can really be realistic from the get-go about deadlines and goals and all this kind of stuff, so that we're not setting ourselves up for failure from day one. Like, this is all the things you have to do this summer, and if you don't get them done, you fail. So is it fruitful to have these conversations, to like really try to tease? I mean, obviously one-on-one, but just tease out where the issues are. Fine.
I definitely think so. Before I came here, I had a different type of job where I oversaw people doing things. And, when we had a performance issue, which is kind of like a learning issue, right? We would always say, is it a learning issue? Is it a resources issue? Or is it a motivation issue, right? So is it just that the way I'm trying to have you learn this isn't working for you, in which case it's my job to change that, right? Is it a resources issue? Like you just said, is this person spread too thin? Do they have are they taking too many classes? Do they have family challenges at home? Are they, caring for someone else? Do they not have a reliable car? Like, there's so many things, right? Or is it a motivation issue, in which case this isn't their top priority, not because of resources, but for some other reason? And if that's the case, then maybe we need to, look at why that may be, and if we can change that motivation or help them find something that is motivating for them if this isn't the thing. So I definitely think those approaches are helpful and can help you get to the root of what is going to be most helpful and support them best. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I know that being an undergraduate in 2023 is different in so many ways from being an undergraduate in 2001, which is thinking back to my own experience. But when I was an undergraduate, I did not know about any of my neurodiversity yet. I take that back a little bit. I was diagnosed in high school, but absolutely no treatment, or it was never addressed again. Literally, my parents were like, "Nope, not going to deal with that." So I had only the vaguest sense of it. But it's also important to keep in mind that neurodiversity and mental illness or mental health challenges might be the better thing to say there, often overlap and exacerbate one another, but they're not the same thing, right? So it could be that you have a student with actual neurological learning differences, and that's the challenge. It could be you have a student who's struggling with depression or an anxiety disorder, and that's a challenge. And it's important, I think, not to conflate those, because a student who can't get out of bed in the morning because of depression and a student who has a severe case of ADHD that maybe isn't totally under control, or they're not on the best medicine for it or something like that, right? Those, I think it's easy to lump those together as similar problems for the instructor to manage. And I think it's also worth saying that they're fundamentally different. And even though neurodiversity and mental health challenges, I say this as a layperson, but it seems to me very self-evident, are very intertwined, and there's a solid Venn diagram there. They're not, they need to be approached as distinct things.
I'm going to just jump in really quickly and say that thank you, Jason, for that. I think that that's a really important distinction and something that I want us to kind of continue talking about, and everything here that would like us to continue talking about. I know we're at time, so I just wanted to take a moment to say that if anybody needs to leave, I know we're at 1:30 already. But in addition to that, what you've all done here, for me, especially from the Center for Instructional Innovation, is given us the questions that we need to keep working with and finding resources for and helping answer together as a group. And that's what we're going to keep moving towards. And so, Diana, I'm going to ask you to send me those slides. They were truly wonderful, and I'm going to circulate those. We'll obviously also have the recordings here circulated, but I want to just say that from the Center for Instructional Innovation, this conversation is not over. And Diana and Jason, I'm going to let you have the last word here for this series.
I have enjoyed doing this, and like I've said a few times, I feel like it's just hopefully just the beginning, but thank you to Christine and Erica and your whole department for giving us this opportunity and platform to do this, and I hope we can continue.
Yeah, same. I really appreciate Diana thinking of me to join in this, because I, am not an expert in it on any level other than the fact that in the last 6 months or so, it has suddenly become a very intensive part of my personal life. My son and I were both diagnosed with ASD in the last half year. And so being able to kind of work out some of it here has been really meaningful. And so I really appreciate the sort of confluence of being able to participate in a 4-part lunch and learn, and also, to put it bluntly, work out some of my own shit. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you all so much.
Right.